To gather intel. How do we gather the intel and why are we doing it? This one is also vitally important. The main reason we're gathering intel, which just means gathering information, is so we can find out what pain points they're having, what they value, want, and need. You could say that we're getting the keys to the deal during this stage. When we're gathering intel, we're finding out exactly what they want, like, and need. You could say that we're getting the keys to the deal during this stage. When we're gathering intel, we're finding out exactly what they want, like, and need, and we're identifying all of their pain points. It's that simple. And then we use that information to build value in our product or service later when we're giving them a demo or presentation of it. The number one most important thing about this step is to actively listen. Also, be aware that more than likely, the prospect wants some information too. So you need to be prepared to give it to them. It's an exchange of intel if you do it right. They want information, you want information. The important thing to know is to make sure that you actually listen to their needs. Don't be pushy or high pressure. People hate that. It doesn't work no matter what uncle gave you advice or which guru told you different. Don't do it. Just provide relevant and intelligent information and always get back to people in a timely manner. That is literally the foundational elements that you want to focus on while you're gathering the information that you need and want. Ideally, when we're seeing if we can help people, we want to try and get about 10 to 15 pieces of information from them. Any more, and they start to feel like we're interrogating them. Any less, they start to feel like we don't care. So the right mix is about 10 to 15 good questions. That's about the right amount of intel that can get us what we need without asking too many questions and jeopardizing the relationship. And again, be prepared to answer some of their questions too. They will most certainly be asking about things like price and terms, so you want to be prepared to answer them by having the latest information and updates. We talked about this earlier. Now, the key to the whole step is to make sure that it's perceived as a simple conversation. If it goes well, it's just a simple, comfortable, back and forth conversation. Now, the step sounds pretty easy, but it's often mishandled because amateurs don't really know how to ask great questions or listen to the answers. I mean, they listen, but they don't truly listen. I call it active listening, which is where you listen to understand, not just to respond. Most people listen to respond and not to understand. I'm listening to you and thinking of how I want to respond to what you're saying. And when I'm doing that, I'm not actively listening. When people do this, they could be missing perfectly valuable information that they could have used to make the sale or used in negotiations. This is why it's critical to actively listen to your prospects, so you get all the info you need to build value in your product or service beyond the customer's value for their money. Make sense? Pretty simple when you break it down, isn't it? Don't make it complicated. Most amateurs think this is where we just want to find out what the customer can buy or wants to buy. Or as they call it, it's time to qualify them. Old school high pressure people will call it qualifying your customer. Qualifying basically means that we're trying to find out if they can even buy anything before we waste our time on them. That's old school. Let me tell you why that's a bad idea these days. First, buyers are less concerned with discussing budget, authority, and timelines, their credit profile. They don't really care about that. Okay? It offends them. Only about 25%, that's 1 in 4 people, even want to talk about stuff like that. Second, if you can make a quick friend, they could easily become one of your best referrals or lead sources. So don't always judge a book by the cover. Don't always try and find out if they can just buy something or not. Try to be interested to see if you can help them and make a friend. Sometimes, somebody that you normally wouldn't even spend 5 minutes with turns out to be extremely valuable. The best practice here is simple. Treat people like people and never underestimate someone's value. When you're making friends for life, you never know when one will become the most vital of all. So respect them all and never judge a book by its cover. The customer or prospect will always tell you what you need to know if you ask the right questions. What's funny is most people never even ask but a few. They just start talking and running their mouths without finding out anything. The problem with this approach is it's sloppy and it's an amateur move. If the customer will tell you exactly what to sell them and how to sell it to them, why wouldn't you ask and then listen to the answers? You would. Only amateurs or people who didn't know to do it wouldn't do it. Everyone else would. So, if you ever meet a salesperson who just starts trying to sell you a product or service without asking you any questions, you'll know they're rookies or nobody's ever taught them how to do it right. Well, nobody's going to accuse me of not teaching you. So here it is. Always ask people smart questions and then listen to the answers very closely, so you can better explain how your product or service can best help them specifically to their personal needs and wants. Does that make sense? For example, if you were looking for furniture and the salesperson didn't ask you where it was going to go, or if it was replacing something else, or who it was for, they would be derelict in their duties. There are several basic questions you want to always ask, but you never want it to sound like an interrogation. You just want to have an intelligent conversation and gather intel while you're at it. Maybe even provide a little value and intel for them in return. The questions you want to ask are obvious, but you don't always want to be as direct as you'd like to be. Like, if you want to ask somebody how much money they have, you wouldn't just say, "Hey, how much money you got?" or "How much money do you make?" You might say instead, "So what do you do for a living?" You know what I mean? And then just make an educated guess. Don't just be blunt about it. That's not cool, and people will put their guards back up, and that's not what you want. You want people to trust you and start to feel comfortable and safe around you. You want to feel trustworthy and helpful. So what questions do you ask? I like to ask questions that give me a shot at getting them to open up and talk a little bit. If you can get people talking, it's a good thing. I always want to know three main things. What do they want? Why do they need it? And what problems are they trying to get rid of? If you can get that information from them during a quick conversation, you'll be in great shape to execute the next step, which is to build value. This step is where you'll present or demonstrate your product or service and build value while you're doing it. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is when you'll point out all of the value your product has and how it can solve all of the prospect's problems and headaches. You want to use phrases like, "Can you help me understand?" or, "Talk to me about," or something like, "Can you just walk me through this or that?" See, you want to sound as if you're sincerely trying to help them and that you want to understand what their problems are and that you're capable of doing so. So here's a few questions to ask. These would be considered the right questions, but how you ask them should be your own way and using your own personality. What you want to find out is what they're looking to buy, right? Your product or service for. What's it solving? And have they had one before? What did they like about that one? What did they hate about it? Who's it going to be for? Who's going to be using the product or service? I mean, a lot of times we make the assumption they're buying it for themselves when in fact it's for someone else, and then we can accidentally unsell it without even knowing we're doing it. If we didn't know it was for a daughter or a son and we pointed out the speed instead of the safety, it might be the wrong thing to point out and the wrong way to frame it. Make sense? If it's a fast car, for example, you could mention how the speed will help new drivers get out of the way of oncoming traffic. But if it's for the actual customer, not their kid, well, then you might point out how cool they're going to look racing past their buddy's house.